I use AWS all the time for my startups, for any of the applications I'm building out for clients, and I'm going to go into detail as to why. So one is just the cost, bro. Everything in AWS costs like 20 cents, like at a small scale, 20 cents for 1 million requests. That is so cheap that you can just launch any kind of startup that you would want. And if you don't have any users, that's cool. You only lost like $2 and your time, like that's it. So you can actually crank out like a lot of projects. Second thing that is like really, really great, and also actually let me stop here, is if you don't know who I am, I'm a software engineer. I have 5 years of experience. I worked at Citibank, I worked at EasyPost, and now I'm currently a entrepreneur, startup, founder, and going into like that world. So the second thing too, not even like aside from it just being really, really cheap, the second thing it is that it looks really good for resumes. So like again, worst case if your startup fails and you say, oh well, I've got like 3 years of experience doing AWS, or you say like, oh well, I've used AWS before. That looks really, really good because most companies are using AWS and most companies want people who have at least used it, right? Yeah, it's nice that you use Azure or Google Cloud, but like when you look at job postings right now, most of them are going to say AWS. And when you talk to a recruiter, and I know because I've talked to the recruiters, they'll say, hey, like, do you have experience with AWS by chance, right? So this is why, like, these are really like the two big reasons as to why I would recommend using AWS when you're building any application. If you're building a side project, if you're in college or something, I don't know, but it's not like that hard to do. And what I'm gonna do in this video is I'm gonna show you guys like just directly how you can kind of go from no thing to like having something. Now, let me skip over here to my page. So what I want to do is I want to show you guys how I created like this application, which could honestly in itself just be like a little indie hacking, I don't know, micro SaaS, whatever you want to call it, whatever buzzword you want to call it. But this could be something where like, it could be profitable, I think, because I don't know anyone who's doing it. But so for example, like let's say we have like some application for digital nomads and they want to, this is a real application that I built. And let's say that you have this like some digital nomads and they really want to know what the news is, but like they don't feel like looking it up in Chinese or Japanese and then translating it and then like kind of knowing, or if they don't want it in Spanish because they don't speak Spanish, but they still do want to live in Medellin, Colombia. I made this application to where like it'll just every single day like populate like what the news articles are. So like now they can know it'll take the article, translate it into English, and then figure out which ones are like relevant. So like I don't really care that like someone I don't know, it's like somebody's birthday or like a politician is doing something. I don't know. I don't care that much about that. But I do care that like the rent is being lowered in like my neighborhood, right? Like that's something I do want to know. So what this application does is it just every single day scrapes and filters using LLMs to do like the parsing and like filtering of what articles are probably going to be relevant to somebody. So we can get Medellin is lowering the rents. I don't know, cultural offer, neighborhood license plate scheme is going to be changing for Friday, or like here it is. And, like contests for best photographers, right? And you can click these articles and actually go to them. So this is the application, and I'm just going to, the point of demoing this is to show you guys like, okay, what does it do? Part is only the front end, but we're going to go into the AWS side, right? So one thing I also want to do is I want to take people's emails down so that if somebody says like, oh, well, I want to subscribe and like be sent out emails, right? How do we do that? Using AWS. So we get here, email successfully stored, right? So this is an actual server. It's actually working. And we have their email now because they're sending them out emails. So yeah, how do we do that? Let's go into AWS and like show like how would we even bother, or how would we conceive of like building out something that can store people's emails into like a database like online, and like AWS might be scary for you, but I just want to go down that rabbit hole, and so we're just going to go through and talk through it. So first things first is that like we're going to want, when we're building this application, we need like some kind of API that we can hit. If you're not familiar with APIs, this video is probably just out of scope for you. If you don't know what an API is, if you don't know what HTTP is, you probably just have to look those up. But like essentially we can't send data from a web server without like some kind of like pipeline, like request protocol or whatever. In this case, we use HTTP. We can create like some API for that. And what we'll do is we will do post requests and get requests. So we're gonna do a post request and a get request. In this case, like if we want to like send out like their email, right, we're gonna want to do that as a post request so that it's encrypted and secure. So send it as a post request to some URL, and then that URL can invoke certain actions. So the actual like pipeline of like these services, we're going to use AWS API Gateway to store like that URL to give us a URL link. We're going to be using Lambda to actually like pull things from our database. So we'll like say like, hey, like run this like code and like pull from the database, right? Like, and that's like the 20 cents per 1 million calls that I mentioned. This one again is like super cheap, very similar. Also very similar. We're going to be storing the data in DynamoDB, which is another option. But so this is going to be a tutorial on how do you set up an API gateway? How do you have it connect to AWS Lambda? How do you write the AWS Lambda function? And then how are we going to be, storing it into DynamoDB, right? And we're just going to do these three things to where we can get a place where we can actually grab users' emails and start using them. Step one, we're going to be creating the API. So we'll just click here, create API. And I think like they changed this. I don't even know. I haven't seen this before, but like there's like two different ones. Apparently this one's like nice because it has native core support. So we can just go ahead and do that and fix it up. We can give a name to it. So this could be like, I don't know, my test API. This will give us a nice little URL. We can set the routes, but like that doesn't matter. Just click next, 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 and then create. Now this is going to establish like those routes for you. So now you can start sending GET requests and POST requests to a link. And if you click here on this left-hand side, you're going to be seeing that you get this link. Like this works too. You can do GET requests to it. Now the routes don't do anything, not found, because we didn't define them. But just like Flask or Django or Express or whatever, you can click routes and you can start defining them. So when we define, we can say like get, like let's say this is like a, I don't know, a library, right? And we just want to get books, like get all the books that are inside that library. So we can say books, and then typically you'll create something that can like retrieve those, right? So this doesn't have anything like, yes, it exists, but like nothing's going to happen. So like, let's attach the integration. And attaching an integration means that like we can connect it to like some type of code. In this case, we're going to attach it to the Lambda function. So let's say we want to pull from the database. So we go here and then say like retrieve books from like DB or something. We go here, Python, select it, whichever language we want. Like you can do it in Python. Python's nice though, just because it's simple, and I like Python. So it'll be loading as we're creating this function. And then it finishes in about 5 seconds. So now we have it created, we can actually go ahead and look it up here. So we have a get books, Lambda function is where we're going to be targeting, and then we can just retrieve books from DB. Grant access to invoke your Lambda function. And it's there, and you used to need to click deploy, but looks like they fixed that to where it auto deploys like a thing now. So thank you, AWS. And essentially that is it. Like that is how you create routes, right? If you want to, we just need to actually fix the logic in here, but like this will work, right? If we hit this thing, books, we go to here, this API route, we go here and we do a GET request to that URL, call it at like /books. We're going to see hello from Lambda. Look at that. It actually exists. It hits here. We actually execute this code. This code is charging us 20 cents for every 1 million requests. And it runs it. And if we want to add in API keys, you can check out my video on like adding API keys so that other people can't like abuse your system. But for now, right, like this is okay. The big question is like, how can we get this to retrieve from the database and like start like actually getting entries, which will be into DynamoDB. So we just step in, go into DynamoDB, create a table. We can call it like books if we want, give it like an ID, and call this a number. And just create the table. And now the table is actually made. Right now the table is actually made. We can actually test like the retrieval function. And what I'm going to do is actually copy and paste some boilerplate code. We can use Bodo3. This is like AWS's tool that lets you like retrieve things in their ecosystem. So you can do DynamoDB, define it, grab the table, books, look for the table, and then just grab the items and then return them. And we don't actually have any items here. So there's several things, right? One, we don't have any items here. And if we want to test this, we'd probably like to at least like see something, right? So let's just say that we just got one. Just like one. That's okay. Go ahead and create it. And make sure that it actually exists, right? Start a scan. We do have it. It does exist. So we have this code here, and now we just need to run it. Now, before that, permissions are like a really big thing in AWS. So everything needs to have like the right permissions. So you actually, when you create the Lambda function, before you can access the database, you need to go into here, go into roles, or just like search it, whatever. But you'll see here, and you can type in like retrieve books from DB. That's a role, or you can even search it on this left-hand side too, just retrieve. And then we just need to add some more permissions, which is going to be for DynamoDB. And we're going to give it full access in this case, although read only like is probably fine too, right? But we're a startup. We're going fast. We're blazing through, okay? So once we go here, now we can actually test the URL by querying again. Instead of hello from Lambda, we should get a different call, right? And it should actually go through the database. And we get internal server error. I don't know why that's the case. Okay, so the issue was that I created this books one and I used the decimal for probably the first time ever. And when you use decimals, you can't just do JSON dump because they're like floating essentially, right? 0.000001 or whatever. And JSON doesn't handle that. So what I'm gonna do is make a new table, or what I made a new table same way, but this time I set it with a title. And so this title is gonna be a string. So like we can see like, oh, we have like some books, like Hunger Games. Or something, Hunger Games. And that'll be fine. And then instead, like when we go here, we'll still keep the code, but then this time we'll just do books by name, deploy it, and then we'll try to test this out. It should not give the floating point decimal conversion error. And we actually get the Hunger Games, so that's cool. And then what does it look like real time? If we were to do a get request to this URL, we do get an array of books with Hunger Games. So this is like a really basic API. Again, what happened was like, here is the code, changed it up, and I added like some error handling that allowed me to get the error that the decimal was there, I believe. And then just go through resource, right, table, grab it, and then take it and put it in items, and then we need to do JSON dumps to actually return it in order to turn it into a JSON that can, you know, be sent. But this is like a super basic API, right? Like you can store, like obviously this is just reading, but like imagine we can store data and all of it can be accessed through this API link right here. You just do a get and post request to this URL and we can start storing things. And you can see how like this can actually become powerful to where you make this modification and like now we have this, right? We have like some web page, we can like store people's emails and ask them that. We can have this code run and it can do post requests and you can do payments, right? So like we can do a post request to Stripe's API and then say, hey, like Stripe, show the person where to put their credit card in so I can get paid, right? This is the power of like AWS, is that you can launch like some startup, charge money off the people who are using like, you know, the web page, and all of it's costing you is like, again, pennies. And like the only cost, the true cost is just your time of actually like developing the application. So hopefully this is helpful and, you know, shows you like, hey, like it's not that hard to make your own like AWS server and AWS database. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can let me know, but that is all for today's video. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something.